Hello everybody and welcome to this edition of the Wisdom of the World Show. My name is Jack Butler, I'm your host, and the Wisdom of the World Show is where we bring you the world's leading minds, hearts and souls and give them a platform to share their wisdom with you. I'm extremely excited to have my guest today, Andrea Isaacs. Andrea is a distinguished person, so let me share some of her biography with you. She's been an emotional and spiritual guide for 30 years and has been on the cutting edge in the field of emotional intelligence since the 90s when she created Any Emotion, a body-based approach to learning the Enneagram, and somatic focusing, an incredibly efficient tool for emotional transformation. She's founding faculty for the Enneagram Institute Part 2 with Russ Hudson and was co-founding editor and publisher of the Enneagram Monthly and was also on the board for 6 years of the International Enneagram Association. She's engaged in several collaborative or creative collaborations focused on emotional intelligence, spirituality and leadership. Her students have called her a spiritual teacher extraordinaire. She travels the world, and I mean this literally, if you've seen her schedule recently, teaching and coaching, and has made a significant impact on the lives of thousands of people. And I'm also pleased to say she's a good friend. So, Andrea, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Jack. It's great to be part of Wisdom of the World.
Yeah, well, let's hope we have something wise that we can offer out to people today.
I hope so.
So let's dive in with emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Perhaps you could just start off by just saying a little, for anyone who's not really familiar with that terminology, just what you mean by that. Yeah. And then also beyond that, maybe just to explain where are we with emotional intelligence? Because some people might be aware of like Daniel Goleman and some of the work that he's done. And what's the sort of current leading edge of emotional intelligence?
Sure. Well, Daniel Goleman, of course, popularized the term emotional intelligence. And there's what I would call a more traditional definition, and then there's my definition.
Great.
So the traditional definition is knowing and understanding your own inner emotional life and your emotional reactions, and knowing and accepting and understanding other people's emotional lives, and then, of course, managing the reactions we have to other people. So that's a more traditional definition. And I love that. I think it's really appropriate and accurate. But another way to put it for me is to respond in whatever way life requires. And we all have our comfort zone. And some people often say, well, you know what, that's just me. When you do that, I just do that. That's just the way I am. A lot of people are like that. I would say that's not emotional intelligence. So in order to increase emotional intelligence, we actually have to become more emotionally flexible and increase our range of emotional options. So when you do that thing to me that used to make me do this thing, instead of that, I have new, more expanded options to choose from. And then I can develop ways of choosing an alternative response so that if life requires that I respond with confidence or patience or understanding or whatever, I have the flexibility and the ability to respond, again, in whatever way life requires.
How would you say we can discern what life requires? Is that like an inward process of kind of listening, or how would you help people with that?
Well, that's a sweet question. How do we discern what life requires? I suppose part of it is in the inner knowing. It could be before we respond and certainly afterwards. If afterwards we've realized that what I said or did caused this other person to react, get angry, disappear, withdraw, or do something unpleasant, I would say that I didn't respond well. So often it's in the moment, either knowing what happened or preferably anticipating what might happen. That happens if we know that other person, if we know the triggers with me and that other person, then we can anticipate what might happen. And so emotional intelligence could be anticipating where things might go wrong and then choosing a different path.
And how much do you feel the kind of rising of emotion is an automatic response, and then it's a question of discerning, I feel tense or angry or contracted or withdrawn, or how much can you learn to kind of intercede before that emotion arises? Is it just authentic to have that emotion arise, or are we trying to kind of intervene before that?
Well, those things that are our habits, and let's talk about the shadow side, whether it's being angry or withdrawing, the emotional responses that don't really work so well. Let's talk about that for a moment. So when we're in the learning part of it, and I call it in training, during that part, we'll develop some tools to change that response to something that could be more effective.
Yes.
And so when we're back in real life and we need that new response, there's a series of phases that happens. You could say the first time I might feel the old emotion beginning to arise. I could say for myself, as one who used to be pathologically shy, I could feel the tendency.
Which, by the way, I mean that's a big deal, right? Because people who know you and your work and what you do would really probably struggle to believe that. That's
I know, and you're probably one of them because I've met you later in life when I still feel like a shy person.
Really?
But people who know me now say, "Really?
Yes.
You don't look that way." But honestly, I am a shy, withdrawn person. But I've learned how to change that sort of automatic setting, the default setting. So a situation could arise where I start to feel, maybe I'm shrinking or wanting to disappear, or I want to just run away, or I want to just not say anything. There was a time where I would feel it arising, and that would be the time I would have the inner observer developed sufficiently that I could say, "Uh-oh, I know what happens when I allow that."
Yes.
And so I'm not going to let that happen. So I would have what I would call a mantra and a mudra.
Yes.
They're both Sanskrit terms, as I know you know.
Yeah.
But for people who are listening who may not know, a mantra is a word or phrase. It could be like Om. That's a very common one. Mudra could be a prayer position, and a meditation position. It could be any body position.
Yes.
And they support each other. They both have the intention to allow you to feel a certain way. And so the shy me, I use this mantra for a long time. I hold my ground and I speak my voice. And as I do that, and as I train that in my body, the brain is changing and it's rewiring, and I'm creating new neural pathways. And I could talk more about that later if you want. But what happens is it changes me. You see how I change physically when I say that. I hold my ground. It changes how the brain. It changes the neural pathways. It changes how I think, how I feel, and then how I behave. I don't have to run away.
Yes.
So what happened for me as a shy person, when I started to feel the shyness come on, I could just say, "Hold your ground." I could just say it quietly in my mind. I didn't have to say it out loud, and I didn't have to do that exaggeration. I could just say it. And I realized I wasn't disappearing.
Very cool.
And what happened over time is I could back up in the timeline of things so that if I was going to enter a situation where I would feel the withdrawal and the shyness coming on, as I would approach the situation, I could say in my mind, I hold my ground. I believe in myself. I hold my ground. And as I say that, I could enter that perhaps challenging situation with my confidence, with my voice.
Yes.
And then after training and more practice, I didn't even have to try it. It just became a natural part. It expanded my emotional range, my emotional intelligence, if you will. Because it became a part of my emotional vocabulary.
Yes. Yeah. And then you can draw on it when you need to. So is that a question of, is this something you like practice in private? I mean, would you encourage people to do something like that a little bit every day so that it becomes more of a second nature thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what I say to people is I really believe this works.
Yes.
But it only works if you use it.
Yes.
You can only use it if you remember it.
Yes.
And you can only remember it if you practice it.
Okay.
So the answer is yes, practice, practice, practice. And so most of my work is based on this personality system called the Enneagram.
Yeah.
Ennea means 9 in Greek, and there are 9 personality styles. And in my programs, people develop their own 9 mudras and mantras for each of the Enneagram types as a way to help them embody the strengths and the gifts of each type.
Got it.
And so what I tell them, what I encourage them, is to practice their 9 M&Ms. That's my nickname, my affectionate nickname for the mudras and mantras. They practice their 9 M&Ms as a daily meditation. It could take a half a minute. It could take 30 seconds. And sometimes there's one that you really, really, really need. Like for me, holding my ground.
Yes.
Or for a long time, my type 3 mantra, I believe in myself.
Yes.
I believe in myself. For me, from my perception, that's what 3s do as easily as you and I breathe.
Yeah.
They believe in themselves.
Yeah.
They don't doubt themselves. And as a shy, withdrawn type 4, I doubted myself a lot. So a mantra that I would use on what I call an as-needed basis was, I believe in myself, I believe in myself, I believe in myself. And as I would do that over and over and over again, that neural pathway strengthened and became more a part of my vocabulary, my emotional range, my emotional vocabulary.
Yeah.
And so if you practice all 9, and then use one in particular on an as-needed basis, the more you practice, the more they're there for you.
Yes. So let's look at some of the sort of specific issues that people might have in emotional intelligence. And one of them that I know that we've talked about before is the extent to which people sort of talk out or don't talk. You know, the balance between kind of giving, receiving, and talking and listening. How much is getting that balance? How much is that an issue for people, just generally in your perception? And if it is that you notice, for example, you talk too little or too much, like, what can you do about that?
Well, I love that question. It's really close to my heart.
Okay.
People sometimes ask me, if you were to say that there's a common issue with people, what would it be? And I would say there is. If I could narrow it down to one issue, it would be what you just said.
This is the core issue.
It would be what you said, and I could put it in a lot of different terms. I could say some people overspeak or underspeak.
Yes.
I could say the same thing related to, say, anger. Anger is not a bad thing, but what can be bad about it is how it's expressed.
Yep.
And I would say most people tend to either overexpress it or underexpress it. In other words, people may yell and scream when they're angry, or they withdraw and shut up and they don't say a word about it. And it comes out sideways, backwards, with the wrong people, at the wrong time, with the wrong kind of energy.
Yeah.
And so that's the same idea. The same theme in your question is some people feel like they're too much. They've been accused so often that you're just too much. Would you pull it back a little bit?
Yeah.
Or they feel like they're not enough.
Yes.
I'm like, you're so much more than I am. And, I'm just nothing. There's that inner voice. So it's all kind of the same thing. Yep. So this came to me when I was doing the Enneagram exercises, first for type 8, sometimes called the boss, the leader, the challenger.
Yes.
Those people who are really naturally strong and confident, who tend to either overexpress their anger, or I would say their anger fuse is very short.
Yes.
It's very quick to get. Yeah. And then as I go around the circle, the next one would be type 9, called the peacemaker, or the mediator. And type 9 in some ways is the exact opposite.
Yeah.
They have a very long anger fuse. And they'll say, no, I'm not angry, that's okay, that's all right. And they don't want to rock the boat, inner peace at all costs, and so I won't say anything. And meanwhile, inside there's this turmoil. It's like, I never get my voice, I never get my way. But do you think they ask for what they want?
Probably
no,
not.
Right. So that's what prompted my developing some of these exercises.
Yeah.
And so I like to play with polarities.
Yes.
You may get a sense of that by when I talk about over-under speaking or over or under expressing anger, too big, too little. So I like to work with these extremes. So I have an exercise where you work with a partner, and everybody comes up with 3 examples of ways they have either over or under communicated. And it could be related to just having your voice, it could be related to anger, and it could be a combination. If you only do one of them, just do that, or 2 of whatever combination. And in my work, I work with exaggeration. It's all the emotional energy is translated into physical energy, and we move in the way of. Because by moving experientially, we actually step into the shoes of someone who's experiencing that.
Yes.
In this case, it's stepping into our own shoes and really experiencing whatever ways we engage the over or under speaking.
Yes.
So we have one person who's just a witness. Their job is just to notice their own personal reactions to what you're doing, and then the person who I call the diver, the person who's diving into their personal issues, does the exaggeration. So say one way I have of over-speaking is I'll just rant and rave. And so I illustrate that with movement, an exaggerated movement, because there's something about the exaggeration of something that I get to see the ridiculousness of my behavior.
Yes. It's quite self-humbling, I suppose.
It's very self-humbling, and it becomes motivation for change.
Yep.
We have to be motivated. And when we get disgusted with our behavior, that's motivation.
Yes.
So maybe there's ranting and raving, and I'll throw a tantrum, and I go back and forth, and I'm directing this at my partner, my witness.
Yes.
And then I ring a bell, and the person goes back to their home base, and you just kind of shake it out. Go, oh man, I do that sometimes. Or my next example might be, well, I'll underspeak. Okay, well, how do I do that? Well, I might kind of be nearby, and I hope you really see that I'm really sad and something's really bothering me. And surely you'll ask what's wrong, and when you do, I'll tell you all about it. But I'm going to wait for you to ask me. And gosh, you're not saying anything. No, but you still haven't asked. And she's not asked me what's wrong yet. And I just start getting angry because you've not asked me. Can't you tell something's wrong with me? This is like the inner dialogue.
Yeah.
I want you to I'm craving you to ask me what's wrong. Would you? And then I just get angrier and angry, and then I just walk away in a huff. That's a really good one, right? Some people do that. So then and that's one I used to do. And I walk away when the bell rings. And a third one might be, oh, this is really effective, or not actually, I may run away and hide in that tree and go, I'm sure he'll come find me. I'm sure, like, it's been a half an hour, he's not looked for me yet. I'm sure he'll come find me. Like, where is he? He's going to call. Where's my cell phone? Like, I'm sure he's going to call and say, and exaggerate that behavior. And I'll realize, oh my God, none of this helped my connection with, I believe that all we all want is the connection.
Yes.
That's what we all
be heard,
want.
be understood.
Exactly. Yeah. And I realize none of this is serving my deepest craving, which is to be seen, known, and understood and connected. And so the best practice and what we return to after that, and this is something that the diver and also the witness can both do, because it's just a good practice. This is after doing some meditations based on this, but then we take a moment just to feel and connect to our belly center. And a moment to feel and connect to our heart center. And a moment to just feel and connect to our head or thinking center. And then to feel all three centers. So I feel connected to myself. And then when I'm ready, then I'll open my eyes and approach my partner. And I might start something by saying, if I were over speaking, I might say this one. I speak gently from my heart. And I can only, in a real life situation, I may only need to say that in my mind. I don't need to say it out loud. In the exercise, we say it out loud. But in saying that, I touch my heart space and I feel the connection to your heart space. And then I could say whatever I wanted to say, but it comes from that place of speaking gently from my heart. And if I were the one that were under speaking, or if I did both, then I would do both. But the mantra, or the antidote, I'd like to call it, the antidote for under speaking would be something like approaching and saying, I hold my ground and I speak my voice. And I find when I do that, the little me that wants to hover nearby and wants you to ask me what's wrong or wants to run away and have you come find me, I don't need to do that. I can just stay here and say, I have to tell you what was going on. Or whatever it is. But I can stay present and speak and feel the connection. And what happens for people when they do those exercises is they learn how to manage those extremes.
So what you've just explained there, is that the same as introversion and extroversion? Like the ability, the tendency to talk too much, obviously extroverts tend to, they tend to sort of talk and then think, and perhaps introverts tend to kind of think before they talk. Is that the same dimension, or do you think it's an independent variable?
That's really interesting. I would say, generally speaking, people who are more extroverted are quick to speak and would speak more and would be quicker to anger. And people who are more introverted would tend to take a longer time to speak, would maybe be more inclined to half speak and not, or to underexpress their anger, or just wait and never say anything. So generally speaking, I would say there is a correlation, and there are exceptions to everything.
Of course.
And it's because it used to be that I had people choose one or the other. Do you tend to overspeak or underspeak? Do you tend to, just yell and scream when you're angry, or keep your mouth shut and say nothing? And then I realized people were asking, well, I do both. And I realized, oh, actually I do too. I may withdraw for a long time, but then when you can only hold it in for so long. And then finally it just kind of bursts out, not really in a nice way. And so I have my version of that too. And I think it's that we all have versions of both.
And in your experience, are type dynamics important? So what I mean by that, I noticed that I can be both those people. I noticed that perhaps with people who provide a very open listening space, I can be the guy who's talking all the time and then be like, oh, well, I haven't heard about you. But I also know that sometimes I provide that space for people, and they might get near to the end of the conversation and think, oh, I haven't really heard from you, because they've been, downloading what's going on for them. So do you find that there's a kind of difference if you're just around different types of people, they bring out a different energy in you, and that there's a different dynamic?
That's really true. If you're around different kinds of people, they would draw from different parts of who you are. That is really true. I like to say in my teaching and also my life, it's like, do I have the flexibility to do both? If you really need to talk, am I able to sit and really listen and really hear you? Or if I have something I need to say, am I able to not just half speak, but can I tell you the whole thing? And I'll say another thing about a type dynamic. As a type 4, those who know the Enneagram know that there's this emotional range that the 4s have. And their craving is for you to really fully understand my emotional world. And so when I was young, I used to think, well, I want to explain that emotion from this perspective, but now if you move like an eighth of a degree over this way, let me explain it from this perspective. But if I move a teeny degree this way, let me re-explain it so you really get the picture. And I'll explain it from this perspective. And I realized in my thinking, I had to explain it from every perspective for you to fully understand. And people got sick of it. It was just too much. And of course, I wanted that full understanding, but I finally learned that I could speak once. And that was a beauty. It was like, oh, I could feel done. If I just say it completely, my tendency was to half speak and then want to do it again and again and again. Yep. If I just say it well once, I can stop and let it go. Really? And I'll tell you, what a relief that is.
Probably for you and everyone else.
And everyone else too.
And what was the trigger for that? Was that just one of those kind of like, oh, I realize it, now I get it? Or was there a kind of particular context for that realization?
I'm sure, I'm trying to remember when I first had that aha. There was an aha. I'm thinking back. There was someone in my life who was not a defensive person at all. It's not a word I would usually think of describing someone, but there were situations that could have, been fights.
Yes.
And he had a quality of patience unlike anything I had experienced before, where he could diffuse anything, and it became a really good conversation. And I think that was maybe the beginning, because if something could have become a fight, it wouldn't, because he didn't get defensive, and so I didn't have to be defensive or aggressive. And I think that was the beginning of it. So it was some kind of a gradual evolution until finally I saw the picture. Yes. Like this. I actually saw it in 3 dimension in my mind, and I realized that had happened.
Yes.
So in a way, I realized it after the fact.
Yeah. So let me pick up on this. You've talked about basically giving us more options. We're able to be adaptable and flexible. Yeah. So what do you say to the person who's like, well, I know where my gifts are. I want to play to my gifts. I want to play to my zone of genius. And let's just say, yes, I'm a really talkative person, but I'm great at presenting or selling or something that draws on that. Why should I spend time training these other sort of flexibilities? Should I not just be kind of playing to my forehand and focusing on what I'm really good at? Like, what do you say to that person?
Well, I would ask, is it working for you? And what I have seen to some degree for people who are like that would be, I might ask a question like this. Have you found that in some relationships that you're over-talking, or that you're talking so much has caused a problem in communication with someone? And that person might say, well, actually, yeah. Like so-and-so, like my wife or my girlfriend accused me of like not listening. Yeah. And I go, oh, really? So if that can be motivation for wanting to change. Yes. And so if there's never been an issue, there is no motivation. Yes. And maybe no need. My belief, and it's just my belief, is that the whole range has value. Yes. And we all, and life is about reciprocity in every moment. It's like breath. We breathe in, and we breathe out. That's a reciprocity in ways. Yeah. Things come in, and they go out. It's part of the cycle of life. Yes. And so if we're only just speaking and talking, energetically things are only going one way. Yes. And so part of the reciprocity in connecting, is talking and listening. It's the inhale and the exhale. And so in a way, a certain kind of balance comes when we can do, and when we do both. Yes. Yeah. So presumably both those things are possible. It's possible both to play to your strengths, be in your zone of genius, and even if you are a presenter 50 days of the week, you still want to be able to take in from your audience, be perceptive of what's in the room, maybe provide a great listening space for someone. Like there'll always be these situations where having more, I guess, clubs in the golf cart or caddy is kind of useful. Well, I think you mentioned something that rang a bell for me. There's something about being a presenter where listening to and sensing the energy of people in the room, where that's really important. Yeah. Because I think one of the things that I am good at is reading the energy in the room. Yeah. In my plan, I may think we're going to do this next, and I'm sensing something going on over here, and I realize, put that on hold, or maybe don't even go there. Yes. This needs addressing. Yes. And if I'm not used to the reciprocity, and not just speaking, but also taking in what's out there, I won't notice that. Yes. And there's something about that where everybody in the room really can feel heard. Yes. And there's a feeling, often there's like this collective thing that's happening in the room.
Yes.
Because if it's going on in one person, I would bet you it's going on in others.
Yes.
It's not just that one person. And I do a lot of one-on-one work in a group setting. Mm-hmm. And what I tell people is that it's not selfish. It's not time just for you. Don't feel like you're holding the class or the group back. Because if you're having this issue,
yes.
let me tell you, you're not the only one in this room.
Yes.
And if a person sitting there says they don't have that issue, I bet they know someone who does.
Yes.
And you will help their compassion and understanding
yes.
by doing this work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. Yeah. Yeah. And I think in my experience of great presenters, they're balancing that skill. Because if you have someone who's basically, maybe they're on fire and they're really passionate, but they're just kind of pushing out to an audience for a long time, that's actually hard energetically for you and as an audience member just to keep taking that kind of information in.
Yeah, I've heard people present who they speak fast, they speak a lot of information, there's a lot of data, and a part of me says, well, they're like really smart, they've got a lot to offer.
Yes.
But on the other hand, if they don't allow time for that information to really land in the people who are listening, it's not being a good presenter because it's not being fully received.
Yes.
And another related thing to that is the idea of questions.
Uh-huh.
I know there's some people who like to have you hold the questions until the end. And for me, when I'm in a situation where someone tells me that, it's hard for me. If I have a question, it's hard for me to put it aside and keep my mind open to what next is coming.
Yeah.
And so what I tell people when I teach, ask me any time.
Yeah.
And it's my job to put what I'm saying aside and listen, because I know that you will clear your mind and be ready to receive what I have to say next if you can ask that question.
Yes.
And if you can't, it's like I could go on, but you're not.
Yes.
And I want to bring you with me every step of the way.
Yes.
And the way I can do that is by really listening to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. Well, yeah. Working with groups has a certain flow to it. So every question held at the end is maybe that's informationally that can work if it's purely just I'm
sure. I'm sure there are times that's appropriate.
But when it's actually a group experience, I think that's something different.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk about emotional rippedness.
Rippedness?
Yeah. Well, so at the moment, well, yeah, absolutely, and I don't think this is a term. I think I just made it up. But so I'm doing P90X at the moment. So this is a physical, like it's a multi-modality program that involves karate, yoga, weights, push-ups, chin-ups.
P90X.
Jump training, plyometrics. So it's like it's meant to be. It's been around for a fair while now, but it was put together to try and help people who are already like reasonably fit or who want to get really fit to like be a kind of really intensive, like full body workout. So it's like you shouldn't need to do other things around this. It kind of brings everything together. So I'm just wondering for people who are like, I really like the idea of like really getting into this emotional intelligence. Like, I don't know, what's the best kind of training? What, like, obviously awareness is part of it, and you've mentioned specific kind of mudras and mantras. Like, is there any, other than maybe coming and spending a week with someone like you, is there a kind of protocol or approach that really helps people kind of grok this area of life? So
I want to go back to your original question about being ripped. I know, like, when you're really strong, you're like ripped, right? Like the muscles are rippling. So like being emotionally ripped is like having your emotions really finely tuned and strong.
I get it. Yeah. You're emotionally fit, so you can really you can show up and cope with life. But also, I think there's a sort of receptive part of emotion that's maybe not honoured in the term ripped. I
like it though. I like it.
On your emotional game.
Well, there has been, as you know, a lot written about emotional intelligence the last, say, decade. Actually, Howard Gardner started working with social intelligence. I think that was in the 80s, maybe earlier, 78-ish. And then Daniel Goleman really stood on his shoulders and popularized this term, emotional intelligence. And there's a lot of theory about what that is.
Yes.
There is less about how to develop it. And there are programs out there. I'm very aware of my program and what it does.
Yeah.
I'm not as aware of what the other avenues are.
Okay.
But I would say if someone's not necessarily ready to go sign up for a course, and those are certainly options, that's just a few sort of short techniques in this moment.
Yes.
Would be if you know that certain behaviors or emotional reactions you have don't really work.
Yes.
And we can tell that they don't work either by how we feel or how the person we're engaged with, how they react.
Yes.
That's really information, and that tells us, did that work or not?
Yeah.
If it worked, then you're probably fine. And if it didn't work, there's an opportunity to transform something.
Yes.
So I actually have a shortcut. And it has to do with the body and energy, because I talk a lot about transforming energy.
Yes.
And so just to tell you what I mean by that, so you know what you're transforming here.
Yes.
Energy, in its simplest term, could be a lot or a little. This could be a lot of energy. It could be I'm really excited about something, or I'm really angry at you. And it could be hard to tell the difference. But it's a lot of energy.
Yes.
And a little energy could be really light and gentle.
Yes.
And I could be either really relaxed, or maybe I'm kind of bored. You know, it's hard to tell the difference between that as well.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting that they look alike and they could feel very different. But that's one concept. Another concept is big or small. When that happens, am I feeling really big or am I feeling really small? Another could be what I call space. Am I like being directed in your face, or am I being evasive and really not making eye contact, for example?
Yeah, that's a very different feel.
And another one is time. Am I really being like, you know, hyper fast and multitasking and not really paying attention to anybody or anything? Am I doing that? Or am I just being really slow? So those are some of the elements.
Yes.
That's like the vocabulary.
Yes.
Okay. So if my reaction didn't really work, I could look at this, and this, or if something's about to arise, and I know, oops, this is that thing coming on that I do, and I hate when I do it. Let's take my old example, for example. When I used to want to withdraw and run away. So energetically, I would say it was really light and small and indirect. That's really enough to go on. So I would just, the acronym, there's an acronym here that helps. The acronym is SNOW.
Okay.
So the S stands for, okay, I'm feeling this thing coming on. And of course we have to have trained our inner observer to notice these things. So that's part of it. You know, whether it's a mindfulness practice or meditation, we have to have our inner observer. So I go, oops, this thing is coming on. I hate when I do that. And I know when I get there, it's really hard to come out. So I don't want that to happen. This is my motivation. We have to be motivated. So, okay, I know that place. I don't want to go there. So the S means stop.
Okay.
Whatever it is, just stop. Don't do anything. Don't say anything. And that's important.
Just observe.
Just stop. And in that moment, yes, I can observe. And then the acronym is SNOW. The next letter is N. And that means notice. And what I want you to notice, of course, is the body and the energy. Well, I'm noticing I'm shrinking. I'm getting smaller. I'm noticing I'm turning around and I'm not looking at you. I'm noticing I want to go the other direction. I'm just going to notice. Okay? And then the O, back to the acronym SNOW, S-N-O, this means whatever it was I noticed, do the opposite. So, okay, I'm run away. Maybe I need to make eye contact.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of getting smaller, I need to get bigger.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of that light energy, I need to have a little more solid energy here. And just like, I just noticed I changed physically.
Yes.
And by doing that, it's changing how I think, how I feel, and how I behave.
Yeah.
So the acronym back to SNOW, S-N-O, the W means, wow, change doesn't have to be so difficult. Because now I find I am present with you.
Yes.
And whatever happened, I am present here. I'm not running away. I'm not being small. I can actually talk to you now.
Yes.
So, and it can also work if someone's being really angry. Because if you're really angry and wanting to yell at someone and wanting to strike out, I just want to break your neck.
Stop.
Yeah, okay, stop. Okay, so I won't say anything and I won't do anything.
Yes.
Okay, and then what's the N?
Notice.
I'm noticing my energy is really strong and there's a lot of it.
Do the opposite.
And I'm like wanting to be in your face. Okay. Yeah. And so the opposite would be I'm going to soften that energy. I don't want to be like in your face. So maybe I'm going to just take a look around. Maybe even look inside for a moment. So I'm doing the opposite now. And now I've calmed down.
Yes.
Now whatever it was I was really angry about, I can actually talk to you about from a place of calm. So that's my shortcut for emotional transformation. That. Or you can come to a program, and I do have some coming up. I don't know if this is the time to let people know that.
Yeah.
So there are two things coming up. One is an evening series. It's something I've been wanting to do for, I don't know, almost 2 decades, I think.
Wow. Very good. Wow.
So if I could say in the Enneagram world, there are different schools.
Yes.
There are 2 main schools in a way, and then a lot of offshoots from that.
Yep.
One is the Riso Hudson approach, which has a lot of content describing the psychological levels of development for each personality style.
Yes.
And I'm trained and certified in all of that.
Yes.
And I've been teaching in their school for almost 20 years.
Yes.
And the other approach is the Helen Palmer David Daniels approach. It's the Enneagram in the narrative tradition.
Yes.
Where they have panels, exemplars of people who are that type.
Yes.
And the moderator asks people who are on the panel questions about what's it like to be you?
Type 1, yeah.
Yeah, type 1 or 2 or whatever. And so people learn by hearing from people who are that type what it's like to be them. And then they also train in doing the typing interviews where you can talk with someone and ask a series of questions and help them come to decide what their type is. Exactly. So I'm trained and certified in that approach too. And what I've wanted to do for almost 2 decades now is to combine the systems.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And I don't know why it's taken me so long, but I'm beginning this evening series. It's a combination of doing a panel. I'll talk a little bit about a type.
Yeah.
I'll have a panel with people who are that type.
Yeah.
Then we'll do an any motion exercise about the energies of that type, concluding with an M&M, a mantra and mudra, that helps you embody what you really want from that type. And then we'll go back to a Q&A with the panel.
Very good.
So that series starts Monday evening, March 11th. At Sunrise Ranch in Loveland, Colorado. And we have, it's approximately every other week. Sometimes we skip or it's not quite every other week. And it culminates right before the International Enneagram Association Conference, which is in Denver, the first part of August.
Yes.
So that evening series is upcoming, and that schedule will either be on my website, enneamotion.com. That's ENNEA, motion, MOTION.com.
Yeah.
And that's one series, and then I have another week-long program coming up also just before the International Enneagram Conference, and that's July 22nd to July 28th at Sunrise Ranch in Loveland, Colorado.
Very good. So if people want to connect with you more, best to kind of direct to the website? Is that the
website, enneamotion.com, or to me, they can email me, Andrea, ANDREA, at enneamotion.com.
Very good. So I'm just going to dive back into some stuff that we haven't completely covered here. How much do you relate emotional intelligence with being conscious? So do you see those things as broadly synonymous, or as one as a sort of subset of the other? Obviously, there's a lot of interest in consciousness in the world. We move in circles where people want to be conscious. I talk to people that want to be conscious entrepreneurs. There's people that want to be kind of conscious leaders, or there's increasing momentum in that direction. Obviously, conscious is one of those things that really does need some term definition so that what you're talking about is what I'm talking about. But I guess if you take consciousness as something synonymous with awareness or presence, how much of that is what emotional intelligence kind of really is?
That's a good question. Consciousness is, I'm sure, a prerequisite to emotional intelligence. Some people may just be lucky, and they may just be emotionally balanced. Maybe they had a really good, healthy, nurturing upbringing. But I would say that emotional intelligence is something that can always be developed.
Yes.
I would say, speaking for myself, I don't know that I'll ever be done growing and learning. And I think that that learning and growing is a lifelong endeavor. I might venture to say for everyone, I'm sure there are people who are enlightened in this lifetime, and maybe they don't need to work on their emotional intelligence. That might be pedantic and like kindergarten to elementary, possibly.
That's not my personal experience of people who are quote unquote enlightened. I don't necessarily think that. Well, I don't necessarily think that domain of intelligence or realization necessarily just means that in terms of your interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence that you've just got it down. That's my own experience. But
I'm glad to hear you say that. I believe that it's a lifelong thing. And so consciousness, awareness, mindfulness are all part of being able to learn and grow. Because how do we know what we need to grow and learn and change in ourselves if we're not aware? Language is an interesting thing. In Italian, there's no word for conscious.
Really?
Conscious is like you're either awake or you're asleep.
Right.
Conscious is like, you're conscious, you're unconscious.
It's like you've had a road accident.
But then if you look at the German language, and like Nietzsche and other famous philosophers have come from Germany.
Yes.
The German language has a lot of words. I don't know the language enough to tell you what they are.
You're on safe ground, I don't know.
Yeah. And in the English language now, we're using that word a lot.
Yes.
So that obviously means a lot to our culture. It says a lot about the culture. And I love that businesses, that organizations, that leaders are wanting that quality. Yes. And I think it means that there's more room, more willingness, more openness for something like emotional intelligence.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the three centers you've mentioned before, the belly or gut center, the heart center, the head center. Obviously, for people who are familiar with Enneagram, they'll be familiar with those things. I just wondered if they're, in terms of emotional intelligence, how much is that a three-center phenomenon, or is that really about becoming more attuned in your heart center?
Thank you for that question. I really like it. Well, we are human beings, and there are different capacities we have as human beings. And the first and most obvious one is that we have this physical capacity.
Yes.
And so just acknowledging and accepting that we have this physical capacity, the belly center is important. It's an important part of who we are. And this is where also our action center.
Yes.
So our physical actions are motivated literally from our belly center.
Yeah.
And we also have this emotional capacity. Everyone has an emotional capacity and a particular emotional range.
Yes.
And that is in our heart center. And one of my meditation teachers said, if you don't know how you feel about something, just place your mind on your heart point, not the literal organ of the heart, but the point on your sternum. And that will help. Eventually something will arise. You'll have information about how you feel. And then we all have this mental or thinking capacity, which is our head center. And it's really our experience in life that causes them to separate more from each other.
Yes.
And my belief about really what we all crave, besides the connection I mentioned at the beginning of our time together, is a quality of what I call an internal wholeness. We want to be whole. And if we can have that internal wholeness, and what I call, this is my own definition about wholeness, it's listening equally to my belly center, my heart center, and my head center. And there's a meditation, a series of exercises I have that help people come to this awareness of all three. And it's not that if you don't feel one that you don't have it, or that it's not important. It means if we don't feel that part of our being, that part is actually calling out for our attention.
Yes.
Because there's a way actually to sort of what I call adjust the volume of each center.
Yes.
So one of them doesn't overspeak. Like there are some people we may know who are really head-centered people. They're always analyzing and rationalizing and figuring it out. And they're always in their head. And they may not be as connected to their hearts.
Yes.
There may be people who are just all heart and they're just gushing and wanting to help and nurture and take care of and understand. But is it always the right thing to do?
Yes.
And do I have the capacity to give that much?
Yes.
For example. And then some people are so much in their bellies that they either just act and don't think, and they don't notice how the other person will feel afterwards or what. So they're all important.
Yes.
So I would say in my mind, a very large part of emotional intelligence is listening equally to all three centers, to having them, if possible, in agreement with whatever it is that you're doing with your life. So that your thinking and your feeling and your actions and how you live your life are connected to all of who you are. And that if we have this internal wholeness and if we listen to all three centers internally, then I believe that we can actually manifest a life, an external life, that reflects that wholeness.
Yes.
And in that wholeness, there's something else that happens. And this is a word that's not appropriate in maybe certain circles, but we do connect to something greater. You can call it God, you can call it the universe, you can call it spirit, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But I believe that when we are connected to ourselves in that way, we connect to a wholeness outside ourselves, and that brings on a quality that really makes life worth living.
That's cool. I like that.
Thank you.
It's kind of like, I don't know if this is the right, you've sort of put in a very divine sacred context, but it's almost like you're the kind of DJ there working out. You're looking at the sound levels of your life and thinking like, oh, actually we need to bring the bass up, or we need to turn the treble down, or
I like that.
or something that's kind of about equalizing the various sounds, or maybe you're the conductor of the orchestra and you need to keep the percussion and the wind all in tune.
Yeah, and I also I make a real inviting environment for people just to notice what their tendencies are.
Yes.
And to notice without judgment.
Yes.
When people are doing work like this, it's so important not to judge ourselves, because we do that all the time anyway.
Yeah.
It doesn't help.
Yes.
And so I say, well, just take it in as this is just information. And go, oh, okay, so that part of me needs my attention more. Okay. And as we make the intention to focus more on whichever center we don't hear as much, then then the intention, energy follows attention.
Yes.
And as we place that intention to listen more to that part of us, then our energy goes there and we actually start to hear that voice more.
Yes. Yeah. And in your experience, is that predictable by type?
Very often. Yeah. So I would say the more assertive types, do I want to put it that way? I was going to say 8, 3, and 7, which are more assertive types.
They tend to leave the heart out? Or?
They tend to, that's real possible, they tend to maybe be more action-oriented, just do it, just go. And the withdrawn types, 4, 5, and 9, may tend to be more wrapped up in the emotions. I'm not sure, I haven't really thought of it in this way, without going through around the circle one at a time.
Yeah.
And you can't really say the belly center types are all action as action-oriented, because 8s are very assertive. They really act from their
Yes.
belly center. The 9 in the middle of the what we call the core triangle
Yes.
is maybe the most out of touch with that quality.
Yes.
So there's a whole lot more that can be said about how that manifests in type.
Yes.
So I would say the shortcut there is just to look at your own experience. Which one do I do a lot?
Yes.
And which one do I tend not to do?
Yeah, and by the way, if it's not obvious in your self-observation, I think even just asking a handful of people that interact with you a lot, what balance do you notice between these things? I think people tend to have the summation of people's feedback tends to be reasonably accurate, I think.
Yeah, or even just asking a close friend or an intimate other
Yes.
would be really helpful. Yeah, I think the idea of getting qualitative feedback from someone who really knows you, it doesn't happen often.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting? It's invaluable. When someone knows you well, they're the best ones who can hold up a mirror.
Yes.
And part of the challenge of that is giving someone feedback in a loving way.
Yes.
So it is a skill in itself. And for anybody who has the opportunity to receive something like that, realize it's a gift.
Yes.
It may, that person may not be doing it well because there are nice ways of doing it and harsh ways of doing it.
Yes.
But the point is, and if we can offer that as a gift to someone else, to do it with love, and for us to receive it with love and with the insight that we can get from that, because it really is invaluable to have mirrors.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
To have something reflect back to us how we are.
I think my only caveat with that would be to just check for permission.
That's
Some people are really open to feedback, and other people that can be not necessarily the quickest way to build it.
Yeah, and there's a way to do that too. I had someone in my life who for a long time would say, "Do you mind if I give you some feedback now?" And I always knew that meant I had to brace myself because the brick was about to land,
Yes.
So it's asking for permission, and again, doing it in a loving way.
Skillfully and lovingly, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I like to do also is to always see people's wholeness. In this moment, someone may be acting out of a smallness or some other place, but to just see their wholeness and to believe in their wholeness, to believe in my own wholeness.
Yeah.
Because I think that is what we all want. We may be and have sometimes, but when it's not there, it's what we're longing for.
Yes.
That's my belief.
Yeah. So, final question: Where do you see this going? This line of work with emotional intelligence. Do you feel hopeful that we are gradually, as a population or as a global society, becoming increasingly emotionally literate? And if anyone has particularly resonated with the message that you're sharing today, like if there was one call to action or one go and do this, anything you haven't yet said, what would that be?
I am hopeful.
Great.
I'm hearing the words emotional intelligence or conscious or consciousness in new contexts.
Yes.
In business, conscious leadership, spirituality in business. Words like that are being used together.
Yeah.
And this is giving me hope. And another thing that's giving me hope is the average age of people who used to attend my programs used to be like 50 and above.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, this work is going to die. Because in 10 years, they're all going to be 60 and above. And in 10 years, they'll be 70 and above. Yeah. We need young people. And, I'm just looking at you, Jack, and the work that you have done in your life and the people whose lives you're touching. And recently, I taught programs where there are 19-year-olds and 20 and 21-year-olds. This is happening more. This is bringing me a lot of hope. So it's a combination, seeing the word emotional intelligence and consciousness in the business field. And if you look at the business world, there are businesses that have thousands of people working in that business.
Yes.
So if you bring this work into businesses, especially large businesses, it's going to get out there in the world.
Yes.
And that gives me hope. And then once young people start doing this work, and as they grow and go out into the world and do what they're going to do,
spread what they do. Yeah.
that will change the world. So I believe we are changing the world by doing what we're doing.
Fantastic.
And by what you're doing as well.
Well, thank you. Well, that's a hopeful message on which to end. So I'm equally hopeful because I see the I see the expansion of openness to even talking about emotions in a business context. I think would have been less the done thing. So. Well, cool. Nice spending time with you. Thanks for coming on the show, and all the very best with continuing your work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed our discussion.
Brilliant.